'79, I was working in the woods back there in January in the snow with a chainsaw and cutting down a tree, and the tree came down on me. And I was trapped under that tree and couldn't get out, and nobody around. And finally I said, "Dear Lord, I need your help. Please help me out of here." And the next thing I knew, I was out from under the tree, and I have no idea how I got out from under it.
In Brooklyn, New York, Vincent Fauci was born on May 22, 1923. Though most of his childhood was during the time of the Great Depression, he enjoyed and found the good of his childhood. Mr. Fauci's family moved around quite a lot during those struggling times, but his parents would not let him work. Instead, he was to have a proper education in the New York school systems. 27 years later, he and his family had moved out of the city. Throughout those years living in New York, much had happened. In 1939, the Second World War had begun, and the inevitable had happened to Vincent Fauci. He had been drafted into the U.S. Army.
Really, I can't remember very well, but I said, "Oh boy."
Words flowed from Mr. Fauci's mouth as his reaction to being drafted. Though his family was devastated upon finding the news, he had been chosen for this war. Exhausted and tired, Mr. Fauci was given an SAT test at midnight on his first day of service. He had anticipated the coming of being drafted and felt,
I think I was ready, as anyone ever was at that time.
New York City boy, he took the conscription as a whole new experience and world. Memories of a Sergeant Bunch came to his mind as a memorable instructor.
He was quite an energetic individual and really put us through the routines.
Fauci's response of memorable instructors. South Carolina, the location of the Citadel where Vincent Fauci became a chemical engineer, was a program in which he was appointed to. He was reassigned to the infantry when this program was abandoned 6 months later. Mr. Fauci was now a part of the 100th Infantry Division, located and trained in Fort Benning, Georgia. For 22 days, this division traveled to Europe.
Aboard ship for 22 days. Thought I was in the Navy instead of the Army.
Was what Mr. Fauci said. He traveled through the Mediterranean to South France to avoid submarines and landed in Marseille, France. Though safe upon the French land, the Battle of the Bulge had just begun. A foxhole had become his living quarters in France during the Battle of the Bulge. He saw combat on a daily basis, with shots that rang through the air. Mr. Fauci was a 16mm mortar gunner during these tedious battles. He would target machine gun nests and would shell them, though he had to be quick since he was at a vulnerable and exposed position. This violence had saddened Vincent Fauci, having seen many of his comrades die or wounded. Hot meals had become a rarity since no one got one for 3 months. Though hot meals were scarce, the Christmas holidays had come to relieve them. Vincent Fauci felt treated well as a soldier with his comrades and his infantry.
I have to say, I never regretted a day that I was
Motion
in the
in his
Army.
days as a
No
soldier.
atheists in foxholes.
As these soldiers prayed continually. He missed everything about home, especially his family and his friends. His optimism made him confident the Allies would prevail, though little did he know the worst was yet to come. A month after the Christmas festivities, battle had become thicker in the Bulge. German shells flew overhead of those soldiers, and prayer ran through their minds as well as the mind of Vincent Fauci. Unfortunately, Mr. Fauci had got shot during this battle. He fell lying there in pain when a medic, those considered the bravest men in the army, showed up. The medic ran through the thick of the battle and put a splint on his leg. After heading for cover, his fellow comrades took him to the back of a jeep, and he was headed for a hospital. The uneven roads led Vincent Fauci to see nightfall when they arrived at a MASH hospital where they operated on him. Going into surgery, they told him to count backwards from
by the time I hit 8, I was sound asleep and
his entire leg from toe to his hip. The worst had passed his experience in the army. In England, Mr. Fauci had received the Purple Heart. He later found out he had received the $1 million wound.
The kid next to me said, "What's the $1 million wound?" I said,
Asked the kid next to Vincent, he responded by asking him how long he was in the service.
Everybody knows what that is.
Heading home, Mr. Fauci had 2 things on his mind. 1, to go back to his job, and 2, continue his college education. As a disabled veteran, he was able to go to college for 4 years. He had to take care of his family since his father had passed away, leaving his mother a widow. He attended the Adelphi University 3 miles from his home. that had opened up to guys since it was an all-girls college. Vincent started taking night courses and worked during the day. He worked from 8 in the morning to 4 in the afternoon. Then he went to school from 5 in the afternoon to 10 o'clock at night. Though a tough schedule, he was able to complete his dream. He graduated with a bachelor's degree in chemistry. During his time of recuperation, assignments and maintenance work were given. He had a friend, a rather outgoing person, who asked Vincent if he ever painted for a 2-week trip home, and 5 hours later, he was on a train home. The same opportunity for another 2-week furlough presented itself later again when he was asked if he ever drove a dump truck. 2 days later, he was on his way home. After his time in the hospital, he worked as the entertainment specialist in the special services. Mr. Fauci worked in Camp McCall, North Carolina, as entertainment specialist, he would be responsible for closing the camp. He would tend to the needs of the famous entertainers, such as show them around and make sure they are treated correctly, such as Bob Hope. To take care of the entertainment, he was given a 1942 Buick station, and he said,
And I said, hey, is this what the Army is like in the States?
Vincent Fauci's time in the U.S. Army was without regrets and with very good relationships with his fellow soldiers. Unfortunately, many have lost communication or have passed away during or after the war, though he is still in close communication with some. Fortunately, he was able to wash out the bad memories with the great ones.
This whole experience of the closing down Camp McCall was about 2.5 months, because I was discharged in February of 1946. And here I am.
Sounds like a long but completed journey. Okay, now that's all the time. Thank you, Mr. Fauci, for having served in the U.S. Army in World War II. Knowing this war was a dangerous one, you never backed out. Thank you for sharing your tremendous story with both Sam and I. I greatly appreciate it. I learned it's better to give your life for others and to always have faith in God. This project truly meant a lot to me. I learned and heard of tremendous stories of heroes who were everyday men and women. Thank you so much.